Is it possible for a game to be too good? I'm serious. Is it possible for a game to be so good that it just collapses under the weight of its own awesomeness? This might sound absurd, but hear me out here. I genuinely think Ultrakill has a problem, and the problem is Ultrakill is too good for its own good. Ultrakill's Act 2 update launched just a few months ago, and it's the most substantial content the game has seen in one patch since it launched in early access, essentially. The game's demo featured the prologue, and then the full early access launch contained the game's first act. Future updates added singular secret levels and eventually an entirely new layer, but Ultrakill has never seen as much content come into the game at once as when this update launched in August. Now, part of the beauty of Ultrakill is that it's been developed alongside a dedicated fan base playing, replaying, and breaking the game wide open. It's a unique thing that a more or less linear single-player game has a fan base as dedicated as Ultrakill's, and even rarer that they have a developer that is actually in tune with the ways the community is engaging with the game, and what they want out of the game, and actually responding to it. This isn't to say that Hikita, the developer of Ultrakill, doesn't have an uncompromising vision for the game and that his personal vision and choices for the game aren't what has made it as great as it is. Because God knows if he took every suggestion he got from fans and players of the game, it would be so much worse off. But I truly believe that the openness to the community surrounding this game during the development process is no small part of why the game is as great and successful as it is. Now, this isn't going to be a review or critique of Ultrakill, although that is something I'd like to get to someday soon. Instead, I'm going to address the community. Hi, I'm Nick, also known as Dumpster Man, and you might already know me, maybe not. I've often sort of denied being anyone of much importance in the Ultrakill community because at the end of the day, I'm just a guy who enjoys the game and made some funny videos on it. I'm pretty good at the game after like 100 hours or so with it, but I'm not especially gifted. I kind of just play the game, and that's sort of just it. While some people out there have done way more to actually contribute to the community than I have, and I gotta give credit where it's due. But I also acknowledge that people do care about my content and my opinions on and experiences with the game, and I would be stupid to pretend like that isn't the case. But first and foremost, I am just someone who loves Ultrakill. Full stop. I've always approached my content with an enthusiastic optimism for the game, and while I ultimately don't think the game is perfect, I, like many of you, just love it anyways. And despite minor flaws and imperfections, I am just excited to see this once-in-a-lifetime game take shape and then play it over and over again forever. But I can't deny this anymore. Ultrakill has a major problem. A problem that, if not addressed, will ruin this game for many players. And the problem is you. Okay, maybe not you, Steve, but some of you. And look, I get it. I'm not calling anyone out here. I just want to have a discussion. Early access games have always been somewhat controversial in nature. Obviously, this isn't really much of an issue with Ultrakill. It had New Blood's most successful launch ever, and is, at this point, pretty inarguably their most successful title, period. And don't get my words twisted. Being too cool and too fun and too replayable, even in early access, is a good problem for this game to have. It is a content machine, pun absolutely intended. Machine. And I probably wouldn't even be here addressing you right now if it weren't for the Ultrakill community's tendency to gobble up every last bit of content out there on the game and still squeal for more like a starving pig. But the truth for really any early access game is that if you want to experience it in all of its glory, playing it as it gets developed when you can see all the seams and bugs and changes over time, maybe things you like get removed or changed, maybe later content fails to live up to the promise of the content that got you hooked on the game in the first place. Maybe you just play so much of the game that you burn out on it before it's even completed. One way or another, it's probably not the best way to experience the game in the grand scheme of things. Whatever it may be, buying an early access game is always a gamble. I once made the tough decision to stop playing Subnautica in early access because I liked it. I saw the potential and I thought, you know what? I bet this is going to be absolutely amazing when it's finished, and I put it down after only a couple hours played until the full release. And the result was that it was one of my favorite single gaming experiences of my life when I did finally play the completed version. Now, what I'm not saying is stop playing Ultrakill right now. The early access phase of Ultrakill has been a truly unique and valuable experience. I think the beauty of playing this game in early access is that you get to kind of grow as a player alongside the game, which is not something that can be said of most other linear early access single-player games. The The way Ultrakill is designed makes it so that even something as seemingly minor as a new weapon variant being introduced into the game adds tons of hours of potential playtime as you go back through all the levels and try this or that and see how the game has been transformed by it. In fact, I could heap praise on this game for the way this early access phase has been handled. New content being released into the game comes with more hype than I've seen for entire AAA game launches, and that should be seen as nothing less than a massive triumph of the early access model. But more and more, despite everything that's great about this game, despite how it just gets better and more impressive all the time and more vast in its replayability with every update, I see this discontentment among the community. And this is what I want to address. Some of you are ruining this phenomenal game for yourselves, and you don't even seem to realize it. So let's talk about it. Ultrakill is a challenging game. Obviously, difficulty is subjective, and your experience may vary based on your prior experience with FPS games, what difficulty you're playing on, and how quickly you're able to grasp the game's mechanics. But many of the game's design decisions, as well as the words straight from the mouth of Hikita, suggest that the desired experience is one where the player feels challenged, dies en route to learning the mechanics of the game, the ins and outs of levels, the moves of bosses, and are confronted with the fact that you simply have to learn some of these things to progress in the game, often. Ultrakill honestly has one of the best approaches to difficulty and accessibility that I've seen in any game, period. At least so far. Every difficulty has unique quirks and modifiers to keep the core experience of the game intact while offering an adjustable experience for players of all skill levels. Now the problem is that, at least as of making this video, there is no real level of higher challenge for players that have already mastered the game's violent difficulty. Now let's get something straight here. Violent is no joke. I have at least 100 hours in this game, and while I've P-ranked every level, speedran several levels with respectable times, and just generally have a high level of familiarity and even mastery of many, if not most, of the game's mechanics and high-level techniques, I still can die on this difficulty sometimes, even if it's not an extreme challenge for me to just get through the game on this difficulty. And I strongly believe that I belong to a minority of players. Maybe not necessarily among people invested enough in the game to be watching this video in the first place, but among all Ultrakill players. The game does not yet have Steam achievements, so I'm going to have to do some guessing here, but based on data from other games, I would assume that most players only play through the game once. Now, Ultrakill does a fantastic job of encouraging revisiting levels, improving ranks, and seeking higher levels of challenge as you improve at the game. But the norm, even for highly replayable games, is that most players still only play through the game once. Hell, most players don't even actually beat the game once. Even being extremely charitable to Ultrakill. Let's say around half of those that do finish the game once stick around to replay the game on a higher difficulty or go for P ranks, search for secrets, whatever. And again, I would imagine the vast majority of these initial playthroughs are on difficulties no higher than standard. This leaves a fraction of all players that are actually going on and 100%ing the game's content, or going further to speedrun, grind for top scores in the cyber grind, and so on. Again, this is just a guess, but even with some real effort put into making sure players feel encouraged to explore these things, I think it is safe to assume that if you've done all P ranks, challenges, you fought Minos Prime, and done it all on the highest difficulty, that you belong to a fairly small minority of players. And that is okay. Secret content feels a little more special when it isn't necessarily for everyone. Many games have difficulty settings made to challenge only a select few, or even individual challenges and achievements that are not necessarily meant to be obtainable by everyone. And you should feel proud of having accomplished these things. But since Ultrakill is a game still in development, new content coming to the game will and should always be balanced first and foremost for that first playthrough on standard or violent difficulty. Yet, this seems to be a difficult concept for some hardcore fans of the game to grasp. You might think I'm exaggerating, but the absolute most common comment, complaint, or topic of discussion I experienced regarding the Act 2 update, at least once the Whiplash nerf was sorted out, was that the bosses were simply too easy, especially Gabriel's heresy fight. Now, this might have been a real problem. I personally was plenty satisfied that I died to each of the new bosses a handful of times before I beat them. Granted, I was holding myself back from using all of my advanced tech and cheesy strats so that I could just observe their moves and savor the experience a little bit. But if you didn't, that's honestly fine. It is your prerogative to experience the game that way. I did find most of the new bosses easy in a sense, compared to almost 100 hours of improvement ago when I first faced the likes of V2, Gabriel, and Minos Prime. But now after playing, replaying, P ranking and re-P ranking the entire game, even speedrunning some of these levels, I can obviously recognize these bosses are not designed to challenge me anymore. But it's definitely not just me and players with as much or even more time invested into the game. Let's think about what a first playthrough might look like when the full game is released. Figuring about an hour spent per layer, which is honestly already fairly generous, with maybe a little more time spent on tough bosses like V2 and Gabriel for the first time. By the end of Act 1, you might have 4 to 5 hours in the game at most. Reaching the end of Act 2 will maybe take you 3 to 4 more hours, and a total of maybe 8 hours in the game, again, being pretty generous. Now, Gabriel is a boss that took me 79 attempts on my first playthrough. If you've watched my initial experience with this boss, you probably already know that I didn't really have a good mastery of dodging his attacks or using certain weapons that I'd now consider to be vital for this fight. But I can't imagine I'm alone in this. I didn't look anything up, I just played how I thought I should. And even though I definitely could have performed better, even at my skill level at that moment in time, this was the result one way or another. Now, if I had faced this version of Gabriel only a few hours later that demands dashing, sliding, and parrying to avoid getting comboed by his fast flurries of attacks, and dishes out a lot more damage a lot more quickly, which is a real problem if you aren't, dodging it and dealing it back. Long story short, I would have been shit on yet again. Maybe some of you, when you're struggling to learn a new game, go to the internet, you look things up, and try to learn that way. For me, I tend to just beat my head against the wall until something works. But even if you're struggling on, say, V2 or Gabriel and you go looking for tips, I think it's safe to say what you still probably aren't doing is, let's say, watching every Herb Messiah video and learning and practicing advanced techniques to absolutely delete the boss you're stuck on. And maybe you are, but much more likely you're just looking for quick tips to get by. So when discussing whether or not Gabriel or any Act 2 boss is quote-unquote too easy, we need to put into perspective who these bosses are actually meant to challenge, at least on the standard difficulty. It's people who are on their first ever playthrough with no knowledge of advanced strategies and techniques. So I'm sorry, but anyone who is expecting a Minos Prime level challenge or even close to it from this or any other boss in this update was completely deluded in the first place. And you know who knows this? Akita. Akita even tweeted that he was happy with the amount of time Gabe 2 was taking for new players, and even despite this, a change was made to make this boss harder by making him take 50% damage while incapacitated in his phase transition. Technically, I'd argue this change way more targets veteran players than new players anyways, since new players probably aren't spamming overheat nails or railcoining Gabe to stun lock him during this phase transition. But what it is instead is a pretty well-known strategy used for P ranking or speedrunning the boss. In reality, this is more of just a quality of life change to make sure you can't accidentally skip his second phase than anything. But it doesn't make the boss substantially more difficult for new players. The real truth of the matter is that if you've played through the game more than once, gone for P ranks, fought Minos Prime, etc., new non-optional content is simply not going to be specifically balanced to challenge you. What will still exist for veteran players is Prime Sanctums, and the eventual higher difficulties Brutal and Ultrakill Must Die. But you simply cannot expect regular levels and bosses to continue to challenge you the more time you put into improving at the game. I have a high degree of faith that this game, upon full release, will deliver satisfyingly challenging content for people of all, or at least most, skill levels. But since the game is currently in early access, you are obviously going to have some patience for that. Now, if you feel completely incapable of waiting for more challenging content to release, and you also can't fathom just taking a break from the game until it does, I do have some good news for you. Ultrakill actually has another hidden difficulty slider that you may not know about. No. You might be familiar with this sort of thing if you've played Elden Ring. When Elden Ring released, there was a lot of discourse about if the game was too hard and needed a difficulty slider, an easy mode, or more difficulty options. But the truth is that Elden Ring does have these options, and they're not even that obscure or hidden. Elden Ring, more so than any other Souls game in the past, allows you to get stupidly, obscenely overpowered if you so please. Now, you have to choose to use the overpowered weapons, summons, spells, rune farms, etc. And if you don't engage in this stuff, your experience will be similar in difficulty to past Souls games, or perhaps even a little harder. But if you do engage with all of these things, you can make the game absurdly easy, at least compared to its general reputation. Now, on the flip side, you can also complete the game with weak and silly weapons without leveling up, and even without taking a hit, running, rolling, dealing damage yourself, etc. if you so desire that greater level of challenge. Now, although Ultrakill does have an actual difficulty selection, unlike Elden Ring and Souls games, the truth is that these exact same ideas can absolutely be applied to this game as well. Sure, Ultrakill does not have XP to grind or anything like that, but there is 1,000,001 ways to dish out ludicrous amounts of damage to bosses, clear arenas full of enemies in 0.5 seconds, and so on, if you choose to use these things. And yes, though they are intended mechanics, using everything in your arsenal optimally can make the game insanely easy. That's sort of the point. You can also complete the entire game with the default revolver or the feedbacker arm and nothing else. It is entirely your choice. I've seen people call things like nail bombs, saw traps, or ultra ricochets cheese, but I think what people need to understand is that if these mechanics are in the game, acknowledged by the developer, and remain in the game for a long period of time, they are supposed to be there and are intended to be used, if, of course, you want to. I know that sounds crazy, but nobody is putting a gun to your head and forcing you to toss 4 coins up in the air and hit him with the charge piercer shot on the first time you see Gabriel to kill him in 0.5 seconds, then go complain on Twitter or in YouTube comments about how he's too easy. I honestly felt at a point like this sentiment was pretty obvious and by and large accepted by the community. But as more people have started playing the game and the community has grown a lot larger, it seems now that opinions are much more split on this. But in my personal opinion, at some point, higher skilled players need to be capable of finding the fun in quote-unquote bullying bosses, finding new and creative ways to beat them, getting faster times, higher style, etc. Or on the flip side, crippling yourself to the degree that bosses are challenging for you again. This is not an excuse for future bosses to be poorly balanced, but if it hasn't been made obvious by what I've said so far, I genuinely don't believe this to be the case of any bosses currently in the game. And the fact of the matter is that just by virtue of playing this game enough, you are capable of making every boss easy for yourself. Seriously, if I had a penny for every time I've had to read comments to the tune of, Minos Prime is easy actually because all you have to do is just memorize his combos, learn how to dodge and parry them, and then perfectly execute this every time, I'd be a very rich man. Seriously, this is just part of the nature of getting better at a game, and it's astonishing that so many players seem to lack the self-awareness to understand that mastering a boss is not the same thing as it being easy. But if nothing I said sounds appealing to you, and you're already typing a comment about how I'm wrong and this or that is actually too easy and should be harder, and how Hakita needs to rush out brutal and Ultrakill must die because the players are just absolutely starved for challenging content and blah, 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 I have better advice for you. Take a break, learn another game, or just log off for a while. Come back when Ultrakill has content that adequately challenges you, or you've rusted it up enough that it doesn't matter. There is seriously no harm in any of that. Speculation is fun, and I think mostly harmless. With quite a bit of content still yet to release within Ultrakill, it is understandable that people wonder things like what kind of weapon variants will still be added into the game, what will future Prime bosses look like, how will the story end, and there is some interesting theories out there to say the absolute least. And you know what? Fan fiction level theories are not an inherent problem. In fact, even though some of what I've seen out there has been completely ridiculous, this sort of thing is pretty unanimously harmless. And even a good thing in the right light, since it spurs conversation and content creation within the community. The bad side comes from when the speculation gets out of control. Ultrakill is a game that has way outkicked its coverage in almost every way. It's a much bigger game than the size of its development team and budget would suggest, but I think it's relatively easy to let the greatness of this game distract you from the fact that it's still largely a small team and even oftentimes more or less solo effort from Hakita. But why bring this up? Because I think some people don't consider this when they dream up their ideal version of what Ultrakill will look like. I've seen people speculate on a hidden act where V1 goes to heaven and kills God, an entire campaign where you play as V2, V2 Prime. I don't even know where this stuff is coming from, but come on. It's sometimes difficult to tell how serious some of this is because some of the speculation actually gets so ridiculous that I can't help but just automatically assume it's a joke. There is something called Poe's Law, which essentially means that if you aren't explicitly clear that you're joking or doing something for the purpose of satire, idiots, some people, will assume it's serious and ultimately also act like idiots, though now without the purpose of satire. Again, though, it's hard to say how harmful this really is for something like Ultrakill. I think the absolute worst possible outcome is that you get naively sucked up in speculation and get excited over something that was probably unrealistic in the first place, and ultimately are disappointed when the game updates and doesn't have whatever thing that you got yourself worked up over. But that doesn't really harm anyone but yourself, as long as you don't then, take that anger and disappointment out on Hakita and the other developers on Twitter. I don't know if this has happened much, truth be told. I assume it probably has because fans of really anything are crazy. But I did at least personally see some small amounts of vitriol in my comments, directed at nobody in particular, about things like this, especially immediately following the Act 2 update. Again, people disappointed that the update didn't challenge them as much as they would like. Quite a few people disappointed with the visual presentation of the Heresy layer, which was surprising to me because I personally was blown away by it. But I guess if you had built it up in your head to be something other than what it was, its stark visual style could potentially be really off-putting. Act 2 was, of course, mostly met with overwhelming positivity. But when you see and consume as many opinions as I do about the game, it's easy to hyper-focus on some negative ones, even when they are drastically in the minority. But there is another problem too, and a bigger one at that. People are afraid of change, and these people are not as much of an extreme minority. Ultrakill as a game is changing all the time, and even if your favorite weapons, tech, and playstyle are not constantly being balanced, nerfed, and changed like in some other games, especially live service multiplayer games, new additions and more minor changes to the game can change how people play the game significantly. I mean, just look at the way the Saw launcher on release melted the game's current hardest boss, Minos Prime. This was, of course, nerfed because it was way too strong, even for a game that revolves around the power fantasy of being an extremely lethal killing machine. So yes, balance is still an important thing for single-player games like Ultrakill. It's important for the long-term health of the game to keep these things in check so that no one thing becomes too powerful. And keep in mind, this is a game where you can still do shit like this. Oh my god. But in light of this, one particular change recently set this community on fire. This is the Whiplash. It was introduced at the end of what used to be the final level of early access, allowing players to get their hands on it and then go back and play around with it in an environment that wasn't really designed primarily around being able to zip around arenas so effortlessly, because no levels had yet been designed with Whiplash specifically in mind other than this last little bit of 4-4. So when Act 2 dropped, adding some additional levels after the Whiplash unlock, Akita and team saw fit to add some real risk and reward to using it. Now, using it at low style to grapple to an enemy would build up hard damage. Again, if you were around when this update launched, you probably already know about this, because people couldn't stop whining about it. But a few weeks passed, and while the nerf wasn't completely reverted, Akita and co. did further change the way that hard damage interacts with style to make using Whiplash a more or less non-issue, at least at higher style levels, effectively putting it in a solid and usable place again, but with a little bit of a drawback when used as a crutch. But the way the community reacted to the initial nerf in the first place was completely unacceptable, in my opinion. I don't feel the need to go into too many details, but I saw some people straight up saying that this change had ruined the game for them. That's how far this went. A fairly small change to one of an arsenal of a ton of weapons and arms. Again, this nerf has been mostly rolled back, at least to the point where I see almost nobody complaining about it anymore. But I do honestly wonder if it hadn't been changed, if anyone would still be mad after a few weeks or months pass. I'll just cut to the chase. No, the answer is almost definitely no. And although the Whiplash was changed again regardless, amidst all of that complaining, people discovered great techniques for quickly and fluidly rocket riding. In fact, Glued even made this awesome video on all the ways you can still move around in Cybergrind without the Whiplash. And yet, a vocal portion of the community was still unhappy. They wanted to click a button and zip to their enemies without having to think about it, and they would settle for nothing less. Now, this is not a statement about whether the Whiplash is good or bad for the game, whether changes made to it were healthy or not, and whether or not it's in a better state now or before. I do not care about that. What I care about is that if such a relatively small and innocuous change led to such a meltdown in parts of the community, what will happen if Akita makes a truly controversial change to the game? What will happen if the ending of the game doesn't align with the expectations of many within the community? What will happen if P2 and 3 aren't as epic or challenging as Minos Prime since the bar is already so high? Surely the community will take that well, right? I think we unfortunately get a little glimpse of this sort of thing fairly frequently these days. Ultrakill is in the process of having a lot of its old texture and model work updated. Now, the game is not incredible looking by most standards, but it does have a consistent and striking style that players have come to really like. Many of the older enemy and weapon textures are being updated to be more consistent with newer introductions to the game. Like this. It looks pretty nice, right? Let's see how the community is reacting. Oh no. I'm starting to genuinely wonder if some of these people actually like Ultrakill, or if they just like their fantastical, ideal version of the game that they've built up in their head as being the perfect game. I guess this is the double-edged sword of having a game hit such a critical mass of cult popularity during early access, especially as the game is being developed at a relatively slow pace, at least compared to games with bigger teams and more money behind them. Not that there's anything wrong with this. I'd rather the game be good than rushed, and yes, I do hate that I just accidentally quoted that stupid fake Miyamoto quote, but I'm keeping it in the video. But this slow pace, the gaps between updates, and so on, just allow people to build things up in their minds, as well as getting comfortable with things that are extremely subject to change. And it's not an inherent problem with the way Ultrakill is being developed and that content is being trickled out. It's just going to require a mindset shift from some people, or they will absolutely set themselves up for disappointment in the end. Another unfortunate thing that this has led to is leaks. Now, leaks happen with all sorts of games, especially big AAA games that exchange hundreds of hands for development and QA testing purposes. It's impossible to keep everything under wraps. It's just a reality, but it feels especially unfortunate when it happens to small indie teams. I'm not going to draw any attention to the leaks out there, but several in-development levels and features have been found through data mining. Some of them are even accessible and somewhat playable, albeit unfinished and very rough, clearly not intended to be accessed and played. Maybe Hikita and the dev team don't care, I don't want to speak for them, but I at least personally can't imagine this being good for the game. Incomplete content can build up false expectations or even give people the wrong idea about anticipated content and features. And it removes some suspense that Hikita and New Blood can use to hype up updates and new content. So I think this removes any possibility that upcoming content was left in existing builds of the game on purpose, or at least without care for something like this happening. So all I can say is just don't do it. Don't leak it. Don't look it up. Don't share stuff that has been leaked. I'm aware this has the potential to cause a bit of Streisand effect, and I debated leaving this out of the video completely for this very reason, but I simply haven't seen enough people take a stand against leaks when it comes to the game, and it serves zero purpose but to feed your impatience for new Ultrakill content. It's not a victimless crime, and it may even be hurting this game that you apparently love so much. The final thing I want to discuss is something that if you've been around on my channel or in my community for a while, you might know that I've mentioned before, dealt with in the past, and continue to deal with to this day. Listen, I want to be really clear here. Ultrakill's community has, by and large, been amazing to me. The outpouring of support I got on those first few videos I posted with people urging me to try P ranks and fighting Minos Prime, giving tips. It's a big reason why I stuck with the game at all and am still playing it to this day. Honestly, if you're still watching this video, this section likely doesn't even apply to you. Because I truly believe that the core of this community is amazing, and much like me, just loves this game and wants to see it succeed and flourish. I just want to share this game with as many people as are willing to watch, and that's it. But the Ultrakill community has grown substantially since then, and with it has unfortunately come tons of toxicity. I've spoken publicly about my experience with the unsavory parts of Ultrakill's community, especially in my YouTube comments and my Twitch chat. I will spare you most of the details of that. The good news is that if you're someone who just plays the game, you can totally just ignore this part of the community, for the most part, if you so please. Ultrakill is not a multiplayer game. No one is going to shout at you over a low-quality mic for dying or doing something wrong, and medals aren't being handed out for doing something quicker, better, more stylishly, or in less tries than someone else. As much as some people seem to think that's the case. Hell, the game doesn't even have achievements yet. The only existing competitive spaces for this game, if you can even call them that, are the speedrun and cybergrind leaderboards, which, unless you occupy one of the very top spaces of, I will give you an idea of how many people care where you rank. Yeah. All of this to say, the amount of gatekeeping that I've seen and personally experienced from this community for a game which, for lack of a better term, has no real gate to keep is simply astounding. And it's sad because maybe I was naive to it, but just a short year ago, I didn't get the impression that the community was this way. I was welcomed with open arms, even when I completely sucked and had no idea what I was doing. But even after being an established content creator within this community for a year or so, I now still somehow feel like nothing I do is good enough, like a certain part of this community always wants something more out of me, like I still need to prove something even after 100%ing the game, doing challenge runs, speed running, and just generally giving a ton back to this game that I love. I just don't understand it. Sure, Ultrakill is a challenging game, and yes, it has a high or practically non-existent skill ceiling. You should feel proud of your accomplishments within this crazy game. You should feel proud of what you've learned, the skills you've mastered, and the progress you've made. But you should feel proud of those accomplishments no matter who you are or what those achievements look like. And if you want to chase that faster time, that harder P rank, that higher cyber grind score, by all means, do it. But don't let anyone convince you that your experience with the game is invalid until you've done this or that, which is unfortunately a sentiment I've seen both ends of a number of times. I talked to someone in my Discord very recently who was trying to get all their P ranks. And despite having made really good progress, they still felt down about it and discouraged because they'd seen other people do it faster or they had made it seem easy. First of all, if you aren't having fun or are playing this single-player game for any reason other than a sense of personal enjoyment and accomplishment, you should know that you don't need to feel compelled to go for harder challenges if you don't want to. Full stop. Now, this particular person from my Discord stuck with it and got their last P rank just a few days later. Congrats, by the way. I'm sure you know who you are if you're watching. I can't stress enough that though I don't possess the ridiculous skill level of someone like Herb Messiah or some of the top speedrunners of the game, I feel like I've put in the work to be adequately above average skill in this game, at least for what I do with it. I've 100%ed it by every currently measurable metric, and I still continue to make content on this game just because I love it. But nothing makes me want to continue to engage with this game less than the way some members of this community have treated me, and I genuinely believe that. The community has eroded my enjoyment of the game and made me feel ashamed of accomplishments that I once felt proud of, and made me self-conscious to post videos about and stream my experiences with this game. To those people, I have a message. If you honestly love this game and want others to experience it and feel the same joy that you feel for it, and for the community to grow, stop. Do not gatekeep new players, content creators, whatever. Help them out if they need it, and show them how awesome this game can be. And for everyone else, continue to let people who act this way know that they are not welcome in the community. I know I'm probably fighting a losing battle here, but it kind of sucks to see what's begun to happen to this community. And I know it can't stay small, niche, and wholesome forever, but I'd be lying if I didn't have some hope that things could get better, because I know there's a lot of good out there as well. Now, truth be told, I don't know what I expect to come from this video. I know that it'll probably be met with unanimous support from those who already understand and agree with much of what I'm saying here. Those who probably need to see this video the least, while for the people who need to see it the most, it will probably fall on deaf ears. So instead of giving myself some sort of delusion that anything will change because of this video, I honestly decided to go through with making it or to just get this off my chest. A few months ago, I basically had to force myself to stop reading comments on my Ultrakill videos because toxic and negative comments would just suck me into this black hole, and I'd waste my day responding to people whose minds were never going to be changed by what I had to say. It sounds stupid, but it was just actively making my life worse. But it also eats me up inside. I always wanted to be a content creator that engages with his community and responds to people, good or bad, but now I see why so many don't engage with the comment section at all. It hasn't exactly been a hard and fast rule that I've abided by well, but even just a little bit of abstinence from reading and responding to comments has led to a much healthier relationship overall with content creation for me. So this video is a bit cathartic for me in a way. I get to address all of these comments and sentiments that I've sort of withheld myself from responding to in what I hope is a constructive way. And maybe, just maybe, even have a tiny positive impact on a situation that I've seen as deteriorating. And then just move on. Close this chapter and just continue making fun and positive Ultrakill content for whoever wants to watch. And if that's you, I appreciate you for watching and for being a part of this community. And for you, I can't wait to keep sharing my love for this game. Thanks for watching.